Like this?
Yes, that's good.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this panel, and especially to Dr. Chappell, because I studied this text with him for a long time. So I'm excited to share with all of you about the text. So let's get started. So my paper is called Haribadra's philosophy in the Yogabindu. And oops, so it doesn't move. Okay, sorry. So the Yogabindu is a text from the 6th century on the practice of yoga composed by Haribadra Virahanka. Its main focus is the purification of karmas through the practices of yoga. And the text engages and celebrates practices common to different traditions, such as prayer, meditation, and many others that I will mention later. Haribadra emphasizes the shared goals of cultivating positive virtues, and he stands in his Jain position, but discusses in detail other philosophical viewpoints. Finally, presenting Jainism as a system of religious practice that can stand by itself without a need of external confirmation or agreement. So these are the parts of my paper. First, I give an introduction to the text and the author, but today I will be very brief on this because Abhishek already discussed the issue of authorship. So I will give a general overview of the text. And then the second part in my paper, I talk about methodology, but basically I'm doing a close textual analysis. So I will focus in the third part of my paper here. And in this part, I explain Haribadra's main philosophical arguments against the three schools of thought that he discusses in the last section of the text, and his points of agreement or validation. So with this, I hope to add to our conversation on Haribadra on this panel today. To me, it seems that pragmatism underlies Haribadra's approach to philosophy and religious life, but it would be great to discuss this further with the other panelists and scholars here. So the starting point of Haribadra in the Yogabindu is that suffering is inevitable in the human condition, and that it can only be overcome by spiritual practice. The two main arguments in the text are that the individualized reservoir of karma has to be expelled, and that free will is the main tool to achieve that. So the text discusses many other topics, but the most important message is presenting a fivefold yoga with the goal of eliminating past karma. And the five main parts of this yoga system, as you can see on the screen, are the first one is introspection or self-reflection, adhyatma. The second one is ethical cultivation or bhavana. This one includes the observance of Jain vows and many other practices. Then the third part of this yoga system is meditation or dhyan. Then the fourth part is equanimity, samatha, and the fifth part is the quelling of behavior or vritti samkhya. So this sequence distinguishes this particular Haribadra from other yoga systematizers. And in my paper, I also compare this to other yoga systems in other texts, such as the Tarvarta Sutra many centuries before, and then the Yoga Drishti Samuchaya a few centuries after, that Dr. Chappell will talk about this one today, later on. And then I also talk about the Yoga Shastra, even it's many centuries after, but it's it's very relevant for the conversation. So I talk about them in the paper, but today I just wanted to mention them and focus on the Yogabindu. So going back to our main text, the Yogabindu, the many other topics that appear in the text are related to this fivefold yoga and its soteriological aim, and include many practices. For example, remembering the techniques for remembering past lives, discusses the significance of dreams, the benefits of generosity, the need for careful speech, asceticism, the right motivations in the spiritual path, the practice of discernment, the practice of cleanliness, study of scriptures, mantra recitation, japa, appropriate behavior, ritualized confession, and the debate between the efficacy of free will and grace, etc., etc. So as you can see, I mean, there are many, many practices in this text. Then in regards to the format, the Yogabindu is written in shlokas with a total of 527. In the section that I am focusing on for this paper, which is shlokas from 444 to 521, Haribadra presents a hypothetical debate between the Jain philosophy and the views of Samkhya, Buddhism, and Vedanta. And these are the number of the shlokas that he focuses on these particular schools, the ones that you see on the screen. So this writing format was common at his time, anticipating questions and answers that could be formulated by opponents. I have selected only some verses to show today, because obviously in 15 minutes we cannot read all the verses, but hopefully it gives us kind of a sense of his arguments. And I address all these three schools in a general manner instead of focusing on a particular one, because I think that if I narrow the scope to just one, the overall sense of the Yogabindu will be lost. So let's start with the first one, which is Samkhya. So Haribadra's main critique on Samkhya in the Yogabindu is that the self, which in this system is called Purusha, is considered to be unchanging and unaware. In the Samkhya system, the buddhi is the mechanism through which the self perceives and knows, but this pertains to the realm of Prakriti, the other main element in the system, and therefore transformation happens there, in the realm of Prakriti. But in countering this explanation, Haribadra maintains that the self is fully reflected in the buddhi, not through a transformation of the buddhi, but through a transformation of the self-consciousness. Haribadra shares with classical Samkhya the notion of an individual self, but for him, it is transformative, blissful, and finally omniscient. So in Jainism, the state of final liberation is a state of omniscience, where everything is known. Instead, in Samkhya, knowledge is understood as the realization of there is no doer, no doing, no ownership. Nasmi namenaham. But despite these differences, Haribadra ends his discussion on Samkhya in the Yogabindu by pointing out the importance to overcome self-centeredness and practice equanimity, something that both Samkhya and Jainism required. And I would add that I think he stands closer to Samkhya than to the other two systems that we are going to see. So the second one is Buddhism, and what Haribadra says about this. So his main philosophical criticism regards two Buddhist main ideas, the ones on emptiness and momentariness. So Haribadra questions how one can talk about dharmas if there is actually no self to talk about them. He also tells us that the Buddhists, to explain that the self does not exist, they actually use worldly examples that reveal that the self does exist. So let's look at some verses to get an idea. And he says, momentariness cannot be established. Momentariness teaches arising and falling away. There can be no perfection in a thing that does not exist. There would be no natural order of things. The natural order of things is praised as a continuity of existence. Existence is endless. Its cause cannot be denied. Please note that all the translations included in this presentation are from the Fulbright sponsored project completed by Dr. Christopher Chappell. So the rising and falling away of phenomena without an enduring substance, as you can see in these shlokas, does not make sense in Haribadra's Jain understanding that sees the jiva subjected to karma as the essence of a living being. Haribadra is arguing that nothing would matter if there was no continuity from one moment to another. And for him, if momentariness was real, then human agency, and therefore like the observance of the Jain vows and many other practices, they would just not make sense. And he closes up his discussion on Buddhist ideas with this rhetorical question. So he says, if there is awakening only, if there is no duality, in truth, karma is imaginary. How could there be existence and all the rest? This is not the correct way to think. So in fact, Haribadra reiterates in the text that in order for yoga practices to be successful, the reality of karma must first be acknowledged. Furthermore, he argues that it's not attachment to self that causes karma, but attachment to views, whether it is self or not self. And we can see this in these verses. So he's saying, the cause of karma is infatuation. It does not arise from seeing the self. Even in the case of no self, infatuation would still be there. From seeing the self, one gains knowledge. So as you can see from these shlokas, like Haribadra sees the Buddhist position as defective because ultimately for him, it grasps to a non-self view. So he sees this as problematic, as grasping a self view. So although he celebrates the virtues of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas in other parts of the text, as well as the Buddhist ethical practices, he remains faithful to the Jain philosophy, as clearly seen in these verses. From the dating of the text and the kind of arguments that he's employing, he was probably arguing against Nagarjuna's and Dharmakirti's teaching. In fact, we find a reference to a quote from one of Dharmakirti's writing. In short, he argues against the idealistic Buddhist perceptions of reality, which he sees as delusory and a hindrance to liberation. Okay, and finally, on Vedanta, let's see his ideas. So Haribadra starts with the objection that experience always remains individual. So it means that my experience is never going to be your experience. His experience is not going to be her experience. That's his first argument. The second argument is that if all is oneness, when one gets liberated, others would do as well. But it doesn't happen this way. And then the third main argument is that he questions Vedanta teachings of oneness and illusion. For example, let's look at some verses. If all consciousness is mere imagination, then liberation cannot be other than imaginary. Without karmic states, there could be no rhythm of them in the realm of existence. How then could there be those who are independent from them? What would be the cause of equanimity? Postulating the state of being liberating would be without purpose. In order for liberation to spring up, the sprout might arise from a seed. So from the dating of the Yogabindu, 16th century, and a close reading of Haribadra's words, it seems that he was arguing against the teachings of oneness found in some of the Upanishads, the Gaudapadya Karika, and the Brahma Sutras. In my paper, I go over these sources, but for the purpose of this short presentation, I would just point out that the Mahavakyas of the great sayings can be taken as the basics of Vedanta philosophy that Haribadra opposes. So these main four ideas that, you are one, I am Brahman, Prajnana is Brahman, and the Atman is Brahman. Okay, so to wrap up, in conclusion, in the Yogabindu, Haribadra emphasizes the Jain position that both the soul and karma are real, unlike Vedanta, which tends to attribute reality only to the soul, and unlike Buddhism, which negates reality of both self and other. He also insists on the possibility and need of its transformation, unlike Samkhya. And the Jain philosophy of Anekantavada presupposes an absolute view of reality that encompasses partly the view of other systems of thought, albeit in a subordinate manner. Because of the metaphysical realism underlying this Jain philosophy, Haribadra does not relegate any experience to the realm of illusion, neither underestimates human agency. So for him, experience is at the core of religious practice. And willpower is the motor of Jain yoga. Despite his firm argumentations against other systems of thought, he ends the Yogabindu questioning the value of the task of argumentation itself, which is pretty interesting. And the verses are these ones. These are the last verses of the text. So for the purpose of attaining the higher self, what does it matter which argument one adopts? What matters is joining and holding onto a vision that makes sense, with modest good intent and from a place of compassion. This yoga text is offered and lived by Acharya Haribadra as a drop of yoga. Through lifting this up, one acquires the merit that arises from this cleansing yoga. So as we can see, for him, practice and purification matters most, and we can also see these ideas in other parts of the text. And despite his disagreement with other systems of thought, it is common in all of them the requirement to overcome self-centeredness and develop high moral virtues in order to progress in the spiritual path. So his Jain approach shares with Vedanta the seek for knowledge, and with Buddhism and Samkhya the premise that we all suffer and look for ways of release. So Haribadra's quite flexible approach to philosophy and religious life, as shown in the Yogabindu, invite us to move away from rigidity, interrogate, and take an active role to uplift oneself. It is quite unique from other thinkers of his time and worthy of study for scholars in the field of South Asian religions. So, yes, I leave it here. Thank you. Thank you for your attention. And